Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. My guest is Thomas Friedman. He's a three-time recipient of the Pulitzer Prize for his work with the New York Times, author of several best-selling books. His latest book is Thank You for Being Late, and this book was just translated in French. Merci d'être en retard aux éditions Saint-Simon. Thank you so much for being with us from Washington, D.C. and being with us here in Paris. Your book is really about the simultaneous acceleration of technology, globalization, and climate change. And you said that the challenge of every society today is to adapt to this triple acceleration. But you start your book thanking people who were actually supposed to have breakfast with you, and you thank them because they're late, and you say it allowed me to make a pause. Do we need a pause?
You know, Stephanie, the favorite quote for me from the front of the book is from my teacher and friend, Dov Seidman, who says, when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. But when you press the pause button on a human being, it starts. That's when it starts to reflect, rethink, and reimagine. And boy, don't we need to do a lot of that now when technology, globalization, climate change are all accelerating. But why is that? What I'm really arguing, the book is a celebration of everything old and slow. It's actually a celebration of all those things you cannot download, but have to upload the old-fashioned way. One parent to one child, one teacher to one student, one religious leader to member of congregation. Because my argument is that the faster the world gets, the more those old and slow values are going to matter. You know, think about the internet. What is the internet? It's actually an open sewer of untreated, unfiltered information. If your kids and mine, your citizens and mine, don't have the filters to deal with that open sewer, we have a big problem. But to get those filters, that's values, that's judgment, that's learning. And that can only be done old and slow.
You also start with a conversation you had with a parking attendant who tells you that he has a blog, so he's a competitor, and you're intrigued and you start having a professional relationship with him. Why is this important?
Well, I basically, this was my Ethiopian parking guy at my garage in Washington, D.C.
It's the beginning of the book.
It's how the book begins, because he really triggered the book, because he asked me to read his blog. And eventually I made him a deal. I said, I will teach you how to write a column if you will tell me your life story. And we eventually secured that deal at a coffee house near his office. And I prepared a whole memo for him on how to write a column. And I explained that a news story is meant to inform. That's what you do every day here. And you can do it better or worse. I can do it better or worse. But a column is meant to provoke. It's meant to produce a reaction. And I always say I'm basically in the heating business or the lighting business. I'm either stoking an emotion in you or illuminating something for you. And if I do it well, I do both. But to produce a reaction like that requires combining three things. It requires a chemical reaction. First, what are your values? What are you promoting? What ideas? Are you a communist, a capitalist, a neoliberal, a libertarian, Keynesian? What are you? Second, how do you think the machine works? How do you think the big gears and the pulleys of the world work? What are shaping more things in more places and more ways and more days? And lastly, what have you learned about people and culture? How different people and culture affect the machine and how the machine affects them. Stir those together, let it rise, bake for 45 minutes.
And this triggered the book?
And that's what triggered the book, yeah, because I then sat back and said, well, if that's what a column is, what's my value set? How do I think the machine works today? And what have I learned about people and culture?
So what you say in your book is there are three simultaneous accelerations: technology, globalization, and climate change. And you say it all happened in 2007 with the iPhone. Can you explain?
Well, what I say is that what's shaping more things in more places is that we're in the middle of an acceleration in climate change. We're in the middle of acceleration in globalization. And we're in the middle of acceleration in technology driven by Moore's Law. So Moore's Law was coined in 1965 by the co-founder of Intel, Gordon Moore. And he predicted in 1965 that the speed and power of microchips will double every 24 months. And lo and behold, 52 years later, that's still happening. It's now closer to 30 months, but it's still happening. And that's driving all technological change. Now, one of the hardest things for the average person to understand is the power of an exponential. So I tell the story in the book how Intel's engineers took a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle and said, what if this Beetle improved at the same rate of Moore's Law? And they said if it did today, that Beetle would go 300,000 miles an hour. It would get 2 million miles a gallon, and it would cost 4 cents. That's what we're in the middle of. And that is not just changing the world, it's reshaping everything.
And the challenge of our societies, of course, is to be able to adapt to the rhythm of these transformations. How difficult is it?
Well, the biggest challenge it requires is, I tell the story in the book, Stephanie. I grew up in Minnesota. I was born in 1953. Back in 50s, 60s, 70s, if you were a white male in Minnesota, a congressman there said, you needed a plan to fail. There was so much blue-collar and white-collar work. There was high-wage, middle-skilled.
Different times.
Different times. High-wage, middle-skilled. Today, in the age of acceleration, you need a plan to succeed because there's no high-wage, middle-skilled job anymore. There's high-wage, high-skilled job. There's low-wage, low-skilled job. But machine, software, and automation have really wiped out all the high-wage, middle-skilled jobs. And that's why lifelong learning is really the only way to thrive in the age of acceleration.
Does it explain the rise of populism, you think, or the election of Donald Trump?
No question, because there were many people in America and France who depended on a high-wage, middle-skilled job. And when those jobs disappeared, they were really at sea. We have a terrible heroin epidemic now in America because a lot of these people just dropped out of the workforce. They couldn't get the high skill, and the low skill couldn't sustain them, the low wage, and they just dropped out. So we have a real challenge. The good news, as I point out in the book, is we also have a lot of people working on that problem. You know, I quote my friend Amory Lovins, the physicist. People ask him, are you an optimist or a pessimist, Amory? And he says, I'm neither, because they're just two different forms of fatalism. The optimist says, everything will be great. The pessimist says, everything will be awful. Amory says, I believe in applied hope. Okay. And what I find in America, the places that are working are where people are hopeful, but they know you got to work at it. They're applying hope. And my book is really a prescription for applied hope.
Well, your vision of globalization, Thomas Friedman, is quite optimistic. Didn't you evaluate the downside of globalization, maybe?
Well, I've always believed globalization is everything and its opposite. And it's incredibly authoritarian and incredibly democratizing. It's incredibly homogenizing and incredibly particularizing. It's all about what values we bring to it. And that's why politics matters. The political choices we matter. If French politicians tell Frenchmen in this upcoming election, your problem is with a Moroccan immigrant, they're not telling them the truth. The challenge, what's taking away work, is the microchip, not the Moroccan. And in America, it's not the Mexican, it's the microchip.
But some people believe it.
But many people believe it because you can see a Moroccan, you can see a Mexican, you can't see a microchip.
Did you actually predict the election of Donald Trump?
I didn't predict Trump's election, but I did not predict it either. I was worried till the very, very end because I had been writing this book. So I knew the ground was shifting. I understood the forces that were impacting on people, and it wasn't surprising to me that he was gaining traction. Because what I really find today is that people are starved for navigation. They know the ground is moving under their feet. They're looking for navigators. And that's why my book has a theme song.
What damage can he do?
Oh, he can do a lot of damage because, you see, when the world is moving slowly, when we just need to go 500 miles at 5 miles an hour, if you have a bad leader in France or we have in America, well, you get a little off track.
You call him a bad leader.
You can come back, okay? But if we need to go 5,000 miles an hour, 5,000 miles at 500 miles an hour, small errors in navigation can have huge consequences. France can get so far off track, America can get so far off track that the pain of getting back on track would be enormous. Imagine if the EU breaks up. Imagine if NAFTA collapses. These are small changes that can have huge impacts over time.
I started with the Brexit, but
yeah, absolutely.
That's just the start. You just came back from the Middle East, Thomas Friedman. What will be Trump's foreign policy, do you think, in the Middle East? Will he intervene more or less than Barack Obama?
That's hard to predict, but what worries me most, I was just in Dubai, for instance. I was with many young Arabs. So they're watching America. They're watching Donald Trump smeared President Obama. And then the head of the FBI came out and said, you Trump, you lied. You smeared the previous president. And it seems that Trump is just going to walk away from it. So you know what a lot of Arab, Middle Eastern leaders all over the world, they say, wow, if in America you can now smear your rival and walk away, maybe I'll do that here in Turkey, in Russia, in Kazakhstan, or wherever. So, you know, what we're doing in America now is really setting a new example, and not a good example, all over the world, and it will have long-term consequences.
James Comey, the FBI director, confirms probe of possible coordination between the Kremlin and the Trump campaign. What's your take on this?
Putin hacked our election. And that is an attack on the core of our system, every bit as dangerous as Pearl Harbor and 9/11. Not in terms of the casualties that it caused, but in terms of the attack on what makes us unique as a country. And all I would say is to my friends in France is beware, because he's probably hacking your election right now too.
Is it a hard time for the media right now?
It's a very hard time because it's so easy, to delegitimize the media. I have a president who can tweet directly to people around the world, hundreds of millions of people directly, without an editor, a libel lawyer, or a filter. And so we now have a competitor in a way, but he has no rules, like we, at least at the New York Times, have rules. And so it's a dangerous time for the media. The media has never been more important. And that's why I have a quote from Marie Curie in the front of the book. She said, "This is a time to help people understand more so they can fear less." And in times of rapid change, the role of the media, your network, my newspaper, and all of our colleagues, it is so important that we help people understand more so they fear less.
Thank you so much, Thomas Friedman. Thank you for being with us, and thanks to you for watching, and stay with us on France 24.